We started the live stream, so you can start.
Okay, well, welcome to the Charles Correa Memorial Event 2021. In celebration of Charles's birthday, which is the 1st of September, each year we have something to commemorate the day. And this year we're actually having two significant events. One, the announcement of the winner of the Charles Correa Gold Medal 2021. And this medal is to recognize young students of architecture actually in their final thesis semester. They are undergraduate students from schools around the country who are in a 5-year professional degree program. And Charles started this annual gold medal prize in 1998, which is when his practice was celebrating 40 years. And he felt strongly that, you know, recognizing the research, the thought, the articulation of ideas is also important in the practice of architecture, that he wanted to underline that. And I think by setting up a gold medal for the best design thesis was really meant to highlight that. So Charles's own practice and contribution to the field of architecture, at least in my mind, was based on this nourishment of analysis of context and then finding a design solution. So the articulation of the context is of crucial importance, and that's really what we're developing in a design thesis. And so related to this is the second event today, the international launch of Rahul Marothra's new book, The Kinetic City and Other Essays. And this book, which is a compilation of Rahul's many texts on the city, on urban issues in India and South Asia, really is, you know, really Rahul defining and articulating the context. And it starts with his writings from 1990, which is when he was starting his practice and had just finished his master's degree and had come back to Mumbai. And so much of his early writings, I think, were you know, developments of his thesis, which is like the first 3 essays, which are making legible city form, factitious city, bazaars and Victorian arcades. And again, in his recent book, Working in Mumbai, you can see the clear correlation between practice and articulation of context. And the essay, in fact, Soft Thresholds, the context as generator of practice, which was published in 2019, really illustrates how practice and theory are intertwined. So Rahul is going to walk us through the book, and Christina Steingraber, who's the head of Architangle, the publisher, is going to say a few words. And then there'll be a discussion with Ranjit Hoskote and Kaiwan Mehta, who wrote the foreword and the afterword to the book, and Rajesh Vora, the photographer whose images illustrate the photo essay Kinetic City. So I'm going to pass the screen on to Rahul Marothra, and just Rahul is chair of the Department of Urban Planning and Design and the John T. Dunlop Professor in Housing and Urbanization. He's also a practicing architect, an urban designer, and founder principal of RMA Architects, which has offices in Mumbai and Boston. And above all, he is my husband. So anyway, congratulations, Rahul, and I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nandita. Thank you very much. This is a real honor to be releasing this book on this occasion as the Charles Memorial event. And I think you've already articulated the reasons why I think Charles would have been happy we were doing this, because of course it's his inspiration that has also driven one and motivated one to make these connections between ideas, understanding of context, and one's own practice. We are going to run you through the book as part of this sort of event of the release. And we have with us Christina, Rajesh, Kaiwan, and Ranjit. I think in true Indian or South Asian style. I will start by saying none of them need any introduction. And now I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes introducing them in great detail. But actually, I'm not going to do that because they are really well known. What I'm going to just say is that everyone on this panel are people I've worked with and known for a few decades, including Christina, who will speak first. Christina used to work as part of a much larger publishing house, and my book, Architecture in India since 1990, she's the one who really picked it up and picked up the international edition. Nationally, it was done by Pictor, and really gave the book a lot of wings. And now that she started her own publishing company, we reconnected, and working in Mumbai, and this book is something that Christina has produced. Ranjit and Kaivan, one has known for many decades, and really the last 2 decades, we have engaged very intensely in many sort of conversations, but events, the state of architecture, state of housing, and numerous conversations. And so they're really very much part of even the ideas that sort of have evolved in this book. And so it's a real pleasure to have them here. And lastly, Rajesh Vora, who is a designer, trained photographer, and a friend. Again, we've worked for almost 3 decades, and for the last 2 decades, we've been working together on documenting aspects of not only our projects, but also the city. So these are very long acquaintances and collaborations and friendships. And so it's a real pleasure to have them as part of this conversation. So I'm going to first start by asking Christina to say a few words as the publisher, and then I'll begin to take you through the book. So Christina.
Thank you very much, Rahul. Thank you. Thank you, Nandita, for the introduction and the invitation to be part of your event today. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's an honor, and I'm very much looking to the award ceremony. And before the gold medal will be awarded to the students later today. So we will learn more about this really beautiful and great book by Rahul. Introducing this book today is, to me, a very special moment indeed. Rahul mentioned that we did 10 years ago the book on architecture in India since 1990. But when I looked it up today about our corporations, I realized the Kinetic City and Other Essays is already the 5th corporation we are working on. We published the book on the Kumbh Mela in 2013, then another book in 2016 called Shaping Cities, subtitled Emerging Models of Planning Practices, with Mohamed Assad and the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. And then last year, or a couple of months ago, we probably published the most comprehensive book I ever worked on. It's The Working in Mumbai on RMA Practice. And today we are celebrating the premiere of the Kinetic City and Other Essays together, which is really a pleasure. Rahul's new book relates to a book I had the honor to publish almost 10 years ago. Not a book by Rahul, but I'm talking about Charles Correa's book and the selection of his essays and lectures, which is called A Place in the Shade, The New Landscape and Other Essays. In his book and throughout his life, Charles identified issues of the urbanization process that transformed India so rapidly. And by the time we published A Place in the Shade, Rahul had already introduced the Kinetic City as a symbol for the emerging urban Indian condition in his anchor essay of 2008. So it really has been a pleasure for me and an honor working with the family for more than a decade. So today, I'm really, really happy holding a new book by Rahul in my hands. You will see it in my hands, you see it on the screen, you will see it often today. And so before I hand over to Rahul in a moment, I would like to once again thank all the contributors to the book for a fantastic cooperation. Working on this project together was a real pleasure, from draft to print. We even talked about this book before we started working in Mumbai. And we have an outstanding photo essay by Rajesh Vora about the Kinetic City. And Rajiv's photographic oeuvre is, for me, kind of mind-opening. It's not only related to the Kinetic City, the photos, I learned so much through his photos. I I saw the last years. And so also the wonderful additions to the book, the poetic foreword by Ranjit and the afterword perfectly summarized in conclusion by Kaiwan. And you all should know that publishing a book involves so many people. And we have to thank Julia Wagner. She's a graphic designer and she made the book as special and beautiful as you can see it. And our great team of project managers, Ila, Nasra, Tonnerai, and Sonia, and Nandita as well. So thank you again, Nandita, and the entire team of the Charles Correa Foundation for having all of us today. And I now hand back to Rahul and wish everyone a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you. And thank you for also reminding me that there were other books like the Kumbh Mela, which were much broader collaborations. And therefore, I think I might have singled out only the books that I co-authored. So thanks for doing that. But the wonderful that you're here and you could join us. And with that, let me kind of start and talk a little bit about the book. Here, the kinetic city is the idea that anchors it. It's a pivotal essay, and it really is my kind of observations about urbanism, really emanating from very particularly Mumbai, and all these images that I'm showing you are all Rajesh Vora's images, and they get compiled together as a photo essay at the center of the book. And this idea of the kinetic city is something that took many years to evolve, but really it is about trying to pose an alternate kind of reading of urbanism, especially for our context in South Asia, many parts of Asia too, which is one where the reading of the city is not premised only on architecture being the single instrument by which the city is organized or is given agency in a way regarding its form. And that is really the static city. And so the beginnings of this idea was always posing this as a binary of the static and the kinetic or the fluid or the temporary, the kacha and the pakka. But I think over time one realized that blurring the binary was much more productive to offer this reading, where the occupation of space, associative values that are related to space and the understanding of space and its and the formation of identity were as critical as architecture being the only instrument. And I remember seeing Raghuveer Singh's book on Bombay, where he chose not to have the skyline of the city on the cover, but chose to have the Ganesh immersions on the cover. One realized that these were the alternate spectacles of what one was formulating as the kinetic city. So that's sort of broadly the idea, which is emblematic in a way to anchor this collection of essays. So the book is really broken into 4 parts. The first is, of course, a foreword with Ranjit and essays on the city from 1990 to 2008. And this is an array of essays, which I'll sort of go through in a minute. And then you have a book within the book, which is a book of photo essays done on a different paper, which is looking at the kinetic city. And there's a taxonomy here of transaction, instability, spectacles, and habitation. And before this photo essay is the essay called Negotiating the Static and the Kinetic City, which is 2008, which Christina alluded to, which was the essay where I, at least in my writing, introduced the idea of the kinetic city for the first time. And then the third part of the book is essays from 2016 to 2021. And then the question, of course, is why is there a gap of 8 years? And the reason for that is those 8 years from 2009 to 15 or so, or 16, were times where actually I really worked on the 3 books, or the 2 books, the Kumbh Mela, Architecture in India, which actually took many of these ideas and into formation as books. And then they influenced a new set of writing, which is 2016 onwards. Of course, one wrote essays in those 8 or 9 years, but there were no new ideas in the sense of, but they were really trying to reformulate existing ones. And therefore, this break for me was a very interesting one. And so the essays from 2016 onwards are much broader. They're looking at urbanism beyond Mumbai. They're trying to look at what Mumbai taught us in terms of the resonance it creates for lessons more globally. And so the nature of those essays is slightly different. And then the last part of the book is an inventory of books and catalogs, which I will also share with you. So that is the broad structure of the book, and interspersed with these images that Rajesh has taken, that we've in some ways worked together on over 20 years, discussing the idea of the kinetic city. Some particularly commissioned, and some Rajesh just going out and working on his own ideas and developing them, which have come together, I think, very beautifully in the book. The foreword is really a very important piece, and so is the afterword. And Ranjit was very kind to do this. And I'm going to hand it over now to Ranjit. This is a good moment for him to reflect on the book a little bit.
Thank you so much, Rahul. It's really a very special pleasure and privilege to have been able to contribute to this absolutely marvelous book. And I want to congratulate Christina Steingräber and her team especially, because it's the act of producing this book is also an act of bearing witness to all of these friendships and collegialities, and I would say solidarities. And it's in that spirit that my foreword is phrased. So rather than speak to what's in it, I'm going to speak around it a little in 5 minutes. It's in the very first place, the foreword is offered as in the spirit of tribute, really, to Rahul, who's been a friend for 30 years, more than 30 years, and a teacher, I would say. And as I was writing the foreword, I thought back to precisely the time when we first met and began to think about these issues, which was the early 90s. That was a time where, I don't say this in the foreword, but I'd begun to write about architecture for the Times of India. I also did a year of teaching at the KRVIA in its very first year. And there was the impulse to then to bear witness to what was going on in terms of architecture, urban form, the connections between equity and habitation, and Rahul's contribution at that period to our public sphere, to public reason, was absolutely seminal. So I then had the privilege of being his fellow traveler and fellow pilgrim across the early UDRI, Urban Design Research Institute seminars. We collaborated on a one-day symposium, Alternative Practices, which looked at a two-day symposium, which really reflected on these questions of how the architect might work with a larger public discourse, with political questions, and seeking solutions in materiality and community that were outside of a very standard pedagogy. So this is what I thought I would focus on in the foreword. The fact that Rahul, through his life and career, has really borne witness to every major phase of post-colonial Indian history. And what I try and spell out is the way in which his generation, in the way in which it dealt with the emergency, the way it dealt with the globalization, and the way in which it is now dealing with these questions of what has followed the vexed 1990s. What are the lessons for architecture as a practice? And the more I think about Rahul's practice, the more I think that here is an exemplar for at least 2 or 3 different reasons. One, architecture in post-colonial India really took a long while to balance between its origins in colonial era civil engineering and government projects, infrastructure projects, and more visionary inputs, more visionary encounters that came from its dealings with shifts in architecture internationally. And then there was the question of whether the architect was to be a special practitioner of her or his own discipline, caught up in a certain understanding of expert culture, or was the architect to be a contributor to a much larger public discussion? And I think that that's the transition that Rahul in particular has really played a dominant role in our context, demonstrating how architects cannot step out of, cannot give up on the role of being communicators. How do they bridge the gulf between architecture as expert practice and the world of people who receive and sometimes suffer architecture? people who live in houses that are created, people who have to deal with the consequences of decisions on settlement, habitation, resettlement. And these 21 essays really graph many of these questions. And it's been a pleasure to reread many of them, which I read, of course, in the first instance when they were published. Also to see how Rahul's readership changes, how as a communicator, he's sometimes addressing fellow professionals, sometimes addressing residents of his home city in Bombay, sometimes a much larger international audience that is caught up with questions of the globalization era, sometimes very, very particular uses of unregarded literary forms like the preface, where he establishes a connection with practitioners in other countries, other societies, and yet seeks points of affinity. And to me, it's for these reasons that this book is so crucial and so important, that it demonstrates how one can be completely anchored in one's own context and yet speak to other contexts. I also want to flag here Rahul's role as someone who has not only offered discourse, but who has offered discourse that has transformed the urban fabric. I'm thinking particularly of the way in which, in collaboration with Sharda Dwivedi, Rahul effectively laid the ground for the creation of a cultural district in South Bombay, the Kala Ghoda Arts District. And I'm inexhaustibly amazed and amused at the way in which this has become naturalized, when younger contemporaries speak easily of Kala Ghoda as the arts district. And I often tell them that this was not always the case. It had become a rough district, its infrastructure in disarray. It took public advocacy of the kind that Rahul and Sharda brought to the problem to really transform it. So what you have in this book is discourse that is also, it's critical, it sounds cautionary notes, but it has also been transformative. And I'm not going to say much more. I'm hoping that you'll all go out and buy the book and read the essays and then also the foreword and the afterword. But I'll end by saying that this occasion is not fortuitous where we are now, because at the end of my introduction, my foreword, I also set up a brief intellectual history in which I see Rahul's work. Because too often we tend to think of architecture in terms of its outcomes, its indeed stellar creations, much larger context. Sometimes we forget that our dear old city of Bombay has had its own intellectual history. So I talk briefly about how Rahul's work as an activist, an advocate, an architect, and a thinker is in fact in a lineage. And to me, his precursors in this lineage of Bombay thinkers are people who lived there briefly, people who lived there all their lives. Patrick Geddes, the Scottish sociologist and urban planner. Claude Batley, the English architect who made Bombay his home and has left his mark on it. Charles Correa, master thinker and activist and untiring visionary. And Kamu Iyer, who, the gentlest of architects, never pushed his agenda, but who drew our attention to what was most marvelous in the reserve forms available in our city, and who talked about how one ought to take 20th century architecture seriously as well. In Rahul's work, I see all of these thinkers having left their traces, having left their mark, having made sure that this is a continuity. And to me, that is again something that one sees when these essays are brought together. In the nature of the form, the essay tends to be sporadic, distributed, could easily be lost. It's essential that we have this kind of volume where we see in its depth, in range and intensity, the thought of Rahul Marothra. So thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you, Ranjit. Thank you for those beautifully articulated and very kind words. So thanks, and thanks again for your contribution. So I think just to pick up on something Ranjit said, you know, this first section of essays on the city really is the bridge of, you know, having studied urban design, come back, being confronted with, you know, friends one made who were beginning to worry about the conservation of the city's form, the lack of debate on urban design. So it was really, it was, I think, what one had learned in studying urban design. This was a struggle in the first 10 years to root its relevance to the context in one was working in. And so it morphed into urban conservation. It morphed into many aspects of urban design. And it also made me understand that urban design was really a practice. It was a bridge discipline. It was one that bridged the gap between the abstraction of planning and the site specificity of architecture, which was a very important lesson to learn. It wasn't about big architecture for sure. In fact, urban design was really about activism, because it was about creating feedback loops between the abstraction of planning and the site specificity of architecture. And therefore, the natural way to engage with this was advocacy. And really, the writing became a tool to further that advocacy, with many people one collaborated with, besides the ones on the screen today, with Sham Chainani, Cyrus Gazdar, activists, the Bombay Environmental Action Group, and many others, Sharda Dwivedi, who one wrote a lot with. My affiliations with them was in the role of an activist, but really constructing, from my disciplinary perspective, instruments for that advocacy, in a sense. And so I think that was a big learning in these first years. And so there's an array of essays here, which, this was about making legible urban form. This was The Factitious City, which was looking at reclamations and its connections to urban form. But in the structure of the book, Julia, who is the designer, has done a wonderful job, because what she does is opens every essay with this pullout, and it goes from orange, you'll see by the end, to reds. And this become the kind of milestone. So you can really open the book and look at this one paragraph and understand what the essay's contents are, and then choose to dwell into the essay or not. And so you see a connection between looking at the history of the city from an urban design perspective. Bazaars and Victorian Arcades was about my beginning to start talking about conservation, where how can one reconcile this duality that existed in Mumbai, where bazaars occupied Victorian arcades. And so this is, again, the static and the kinetic city, in a sense, coming together. How does one dissolve that binary? But also looking at what FSI was doing, and why did we have blanket FSI in the city, or looking at Bombay, New Bombay and its history. This was a 25-year reflection to see where it was going, where it could go, where it should go, or looking at the city's form for the future, what I call evolution and involution, the two kind of impulses that any city is always striving to balance. And then there were, of course, essays on architecture, and this was one which was called the Architecture Pluralism, which I did at the request of Kenneth Frampton, who's a well-known critic, and it really became the basis for the book on architecture in India since 1990. And so each of these, now to just show you pages, they're very minimal images, just emblematic images. So it really is a work of words. And one is, even in the design, what's very beautifully done by Julia is how the words are given more prominence than the images. So it's something that you really engage with as text, in a sense. And that's what a typical essay is. Working in Mumbai, this was 1999, which was the beginnings of the idea for the book on working in Mumbai, where the city one saw as being really the generator of practice. And the city really bears on the values we sort of construct. And so one teased out some of those issues here. And then, of course, looking at urban design, going back to architecture. This was looking at architecture in the tropics, because one felt in India, all the images that were beginning to define what modern architecture in India was, or contemporary architecture, were all images from the dry north, the hot and dry north. And the tropics in India, which has, of course, now come into much more prominence with the economies in those parts of the country doing better, that it needed a completely different idiom and imagination and formulation of architecture. And then, of course, this was an essay that reflected 10 years after we had legislation in India, in Mumbai. It reflected on what the work in the fort area we were doing meant. And I called it constructing cultural significance, because what we had really done, I think by default, one realized in reflection, is constructed a new significance for parts of the historic core, what Ranjit was alluding to, the Kala Ghoda cultural district and things. These were forms of constructing significance where the architect has a harder task of walking the fine line between constructing a new significance, but keeping the illusion of architecture and urban form intact as the act of conservation. And so these were new formulations in a way all related to the idea that if you imagined urbanism as this kinetic city formulation, how does even conservation play out within that imagination? Because it has an implication across the disciplinary practices of urbanism within a context like this. And then when the mill lands were being discussed, post-planning in Mumbai was a critique where one said there wasn't any planning. We are now entering an era post-planning where it's laissez-faire, where market forces determine things. So it was a critique on the absence of planning in a sense, and this was 2006. One was also doing work in Bangalore, so this was a commentary on Bangalore, which I called, excuse me, Dysfunctional Boomtown, and it was published in the Harvard Design Magazine. Before I came to Harvard, they invited me to write this piece, which was an honor, and I enjoyed doing very much. And then in 2008, at the invitation of a professor from Columbia University, Andreas Hassan, for his book on urban imaginaries. It was called Other Cities, Other Worlds. He heard me present this at a lecture and asked me and encouraged me to write it up, which I kind of did. And for me, it became really where all these ideas on the essays one had been writing for 10 years kind of began to come together in a, let me say, in a propositional or in a somewhat theoretical framework. And so this is really the anchor essay, which is why I've called it the Kinetic City. It distills and synthesizes, in a sense, many of the questions one was asking. So this is the first part of the book. In the second part of the book, it's called Looking at the Kinetic City. And this is a project with Rajesh Vora. These are all Rajesh's photographs, which we kind of jointly curated for this purpose. I'm just going to show you a very few of these because we don't have time. And within the larger archive, this is not even 5%. So it's a very rich collection of images where we've created this taxonomy for the idea of the kinetic city as transactions, where, you know, things are transacted and the kind of typologies that emanate from it in interstitial spaces, in temporal kind of scales also. And we've also tried to rationalize it in the sense that what is the logic that determines it? And it's really the index of security. As people get more secure if they buy their way formally or informally into the system. So those are the kinds of ideas that have governed the way the section in a sense on transaction has been formulated and formatted, or the Dabbawala, which has been, you know, studied. We've documented it both through video and still images over the years, and even tried to put a temporal scale to it in terms of delivery times, understanding the coding system, and new contemporary forms where with mass-produced housing, mass-produced food, now, you know, other forms of delivery are using the system of the Dabbawala. Instability is about the instability of idea, where urban space and its meaning are often changeable, and they change again on this temporal scale. And so this is a wonderful documentation Rajesh has done over the 2 decades, where simple streets get transformed for festivals and for other occasions, where a temporary architecture often exerts a stronger presence than the more permanent architecture. And it's a very interesting situation in our kind of context. Or the town hall, which gets transformed at Independence Day every year. It changes meaning in a sense. Spectacle is the next one, where the spectacles, as I said, of the kinetic city are not only architecture, it's often festival. It's again on a temporal scale, how urban space is transformed almost architecturally to form new formulations in terms of enclosure with spatial dimensions, which are critical. Or what just happened a few days ago, the Janmashtami, where entire streets are occupied, pedestrianized, for the spectacle of this sort of celebration. And then, of course, the last one is habitation, which is very complex. And what one has tried to do is to understand how habitation sits within different adjacencies of commerce, of infrastructure, how it is very unstable itself in terms of how, you know, things are demolished and get recreated, how different forms of occupation on public space, which often parts of society react to, but their reversibility is, I think, something we should celebrate and work off. And so this is the section. I've only shown you very few images that Rajesh is the major contributor. And so I'm going to pause here and ask Rajesh maybe to reflect upon his contribution. Thank you, Rajesh.
Yeah, thanks, Rahul. Normally, pictures tell the story, but I'll take exception now and I want to say something which I've enjoyed working with you. I'll start by saying I remember Rahul had commissioned me to document how cricket grounds were appropriated to celebrate wedding functions in Mumbai. But practicing as a documentary photographer and consistently trying to catch the right moment in a single frame, documenting the before and after use of spaces initially didn't excite me much. But while juxtaposing the images, what emerged was very exciting. It didn't remain just the before and after sequence, but gave a different visual reading of the narration, raising pertinent questions and archiving it for posterity. This is what drew me into this long-term project. I started seeing, discussing, and documenting other such possibilities where spaces were appropriated for temporary and permanent usages, defining new urban development norms. Sure, the city gave us many opportunities and our collaboration grew, finding time to document the ever-changing urban environment. An example comes to my mind what Rahul just mentioned about the Ganesh Pandals, which come up every year all over the city in the different avatars. Photographing the impermanence, existence, and preserving it in a single frame was also like catching the right moment. Over the years, the documentation became a resource for looking at Rahul's thematic of the kinetic city. Interestingly, like an afterlife, it became my alternate way of seeing and attracted me to join Save Forum, started by a group of urban activists questioning the degradation of the environment in Mumbai, trying to find humble solutions for its improvement. I again tried this visual process of photographing and the results were heartening. We could create a genuine concern with this visual documentation and save the mangroves of Warsaw. As a creative person, discovering the new power of the medium was satisfying to me. Still, it was reassuring to see the respect and the interest the images generated to change the sensibility of urban administrators and planners to bring about a negligible but desired change. Over the last few years, showing this work to many young architecture and urban planning students, I noticed that they could immediately identify with this visual point of view. During my recent photography workshop with architecture students, when I encouraged them to use their cell phone cameras to document urban concerns, we discovered a vital communication approach in the academic studies. Now, I hope this photo essay and Rahul's critical writings will encourage many professionals and concerned citizens to look at our environment and build spaces with a new vision and a purpose. That's all, Rahul.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajesh. And thanks once again for your wonderful contribution. And I'm sure when people see the book and they see actually the whole array of images, including the cricket grounds that you just mentioned, they'll realize sort of, what's gone into it. So let's move to the last part, last two parts, sorry, so that then come the essays on the city from 2016 to 21. And like I said, this comes after an interruption of a few books. It also is, I joined Harvard University. I'm part of another, let's say, ecology or intellectual ecology, which has a great influence, and it propels me to really, as Ranjit mentioned, begin to expand an audience, because now I have students, I have academics I'm sort of interacting with. So it was really a very important moment to begin to broaden and maybe extract from the on-the-ground experiences, because actually the first set of essays were, for me, I often think of them because I've never kept a sketch. Well, I've kept a sketchbook in early parts of my career, but I haven't kept a sketchbook in the sense that many architects do as they go to the site and they discern intuitive readings of it. For me, my sketchbook has been these essays in understanding the context, and that's allowed one to, expand also on the understanding of the context, etc. And so this set of essays is more reflective, and it aspires more to create theoretical frameworks that could be useful in other ways, which is to take the grounded experiences and formulate them and relook at them and reflect about them in different ways. And so these range from questions like this, like can public interest design be taught, to essays on on the work that came out of the Kumbh Mela, which is the permanent and the ephemeral, and questions of what that means for the city. Does permanence matter? Was the provocation. Or more recently, I've been writing about migration, in a time of urban transitions, because the new work is looking at documenting trajectories of urbanization in India and other parts of the world. Colleagues like this, I wrote for a colleague called Felipe Vera, who's been working on migration in Latin America. And so this was a preface for his book on migration in Latin America. Or more recently, and this is not an essay, it was a very long interview, through the pandemic, people were convening people for conversations. And so I included this last as an interview. And so the last section of the book is actually an annotated bibliography on all the writings. And it's an inventory of my writing on architecture and urbanism. And it really lays out this broader landscape of writing. As I've said in this preface, the text that you see, that it's not always scholarly writing. It's often writing which is purposeful for creating what I was calling instruments of advocacy for colleagues I was collaborating with. And sometimes it's archival in nature and just documenting a moment because one feels that this might be harder to regain, like the book on the Victoria terminus that I did with Sharda. So each of these books have a different agency or instrumentality or an aspiration towards one. And so it's quite a broad spectrum and a different array. But I think, again, picking up on what Ranjit said, this sort of act of archiving and reflecting, as well as speculating, because he, as he mentioned, some of it aspires to be propositional, are critical for us, I believe, to gain agency as professionals, because committing in writing, drawing our speculations, or even discerning the patterns that surround us give us agency as professionals in society. And if we do not have that agency or find ways to establish our agency, then we'll break down as a profession. And I think, even before I hand it over to Kaiwan, just to say, I think what he tried to do with the Domus magazine was precisely address this issue, which is how does one give agency to the profession in bringing these down, because otherwise we really break down, because this is what makes research publications not only critical as an exercise, but also crucial instruments, which broadens our reach and formation of potentially new constituencies too, that we can collaborate with in influencing the form of our built environment. And so that's what the intention of this part of our work and practice has been. So this part of the book, these are 2 double spreads. So this is 4 pages that you're seeing. It has all the books that one has done, the ones that are actually better known are the ones that are very small. The ones that have been blown up are the ones that are not well known, just to give attention to them strategically. So these are books on the city that one has done. The annotated bibliography has the specifications of the book, for people who are interested in books and also interested in the written word. And of course, these books go all the way to the first one in 1995, which I did with Sharda, which is called Bombay, The Cities Within. For me was perhaps the most important and exciting book in many ways, perhaps because it was the first one. And so one has also then included catalogs, catalogs from exhibitions, studio reports, other forms of catalogs, and when I separated the books and the catalogs, because the catalogs capture more in an archival way something, so this is again an array of catalogs which one has been engaged with, and then it ends with a selected. It's a 8-page selection of essays and interviews, but again curated, where you also see many of the ideas in collaboration, expanded in collaboration with other people. The essays you see in the book are all my single authorship, but many of those essays found 5 or 10 different avatars in writing them with different people once the ideas were established. And so that has all been captured at the end of the book. The book then sort of ends with a very thoughtful afterword by Kaivan Mehta. Now I'm going to hand it over to Kaivan to, maybe just reflect on what he saw in the book.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you very much. And congratulations to you and Christina Steingraber, the publisher, for having this book out and being released today. So thanks to CCF and Nandita as well. But also, Rahul, thank you very much for inviting me to do this afterward epilogue to the book. And this, in many ways, became sort of the many conversations one has had with you, but also one has had with your work and with your writings since being a young architecture student. So funnily, since the time this book sort of sets out 1990s, 1991, I am an architecture student in the first year of Kamla Raheja, the time when sort of Ranjit is also sort of teaching at Kamla Raheja kind of a moment. And I think the first encounter with your writing was your co-authored book with Sharda, Bombay, The Cities Within. And I think as a young architecture student who could see sort of the city in a turmoil, in a change, that book was one of the few books that you could anchor yourself into thinking about the city. And it is only today that one can really articulate that actually that book is not simply a history of the city of Bombay, but actually it's a book that documents urban transformations and understands the city through the notion of transformations. And then to have it in the middle of 1990s, when even the name of the city gets officially changed, I think is important how that book sort of grasped the sort of the anxieties of the moment that many of us had. And then another essay like the Kinetic City, which in many senses sort of allowed one to think of the city in more ways than simple binaries or simple notions of planning or staticity. And I think some of those notions have really come sort of to be real, especially in the last 1 year of pandemic and lockdown, when literally we in the exodus of migrant labor and workers out of the city, walking sort of days on end back home, we really saw what is the problem of not understanding the city as a kinetic space, but only looking at it as a static space. And in that sense, what I'm trying to sort of wonder and think that very often this kind of reflective, either philosophical or sociological writing is sort of put aside as a more reflection, but actually there are seeds to think for the future in many of these kind of writings. And I think then sort of the other two books, which have also sort of in many ways been important for my work as an academic or as a thinker around the profession, is obviously Architecture Since the 1990s, which again sort of grasps a moment, which I think many of us have now identified with that moment as a moment of change. But what did that moment mean for architecture? That moment meant many things at different landscapes of the built environment, but what did it literally mean for architecture as program, architecture as language? And then another book which sort of reflects between space, urbanity, development, and architecture is the book on Kumbh and the broader question of soft thresholds that sort of at one level is an urban thought, but another level is a very architectural imagination. So I think in a way to reflect on this long period was very, very, very important. And that's where a book like this, I think, becomes crucial, rather than a book that is written as a full-length history of a city or as a book which has a one voice pursuing a certain argument. It's interesting to see a book that sort of captures 30 years, because in that sense, it allows, I think, any one of us, or in the future, anyone who picks up this book, especially for students, to sort of reflect how somebody was thinking in the 1990s and how somebody was thinking in the 2015, and how these different moments of reflection have shaped across a time and shaped across a thematic. There may have been certain ideas that have continued. There may have been certain ideas which have changed or graduated. But in a sense, a book like this allows us to literally dip into different moments of even a certain bracketed moment of history, rather than sort of imagining the city as this one narrative of a history that can be told in one shot. So this notion of an edited collection of essays is, I think very, very important, because in many senses they retain the voice, or they retain the notes of that particular moment. The other interesting thing that I was sort of thinking about when I was going through, or we went through the essays in their earlier forms when they were being selected, or looking at the book later, is also the various platforms which Ranjit also briefly sort of hint upon. The question of where does the professional engage with the public sphere? So whether it is the professional magazine, whether it is a magazine focused on the city, whether it is more professional journals, or whether it is books, co-authored books, collaborations. So I think this is very important as to where does the professional speak? Where does the professional pursue a certain kind of a public sphere? And that public sphere could sort of be the professional peer group, but could also enlarge to a larger peer group, which may not be essentially the architect or the planning sort of professionals, but people from other spheres of interest in sort of human life, urban life, national development, etc., to also a wider audience when you write in a newspaper. And I think this engagement with the larger sphere in all its different layers is extremely, extremely important in how one would define the idea of a public intellectual. And I think this is very important. What I would like to point out is what one gets a certain evidence and a sense of what it means to be a professional public intellectual in the public sphere at large. And as one says, the public sphere is the city, but also at a wider sort of a national or an international level. You think from the home, but you sort of expand into the thoughts of the world simultaneously. And in that sense, this consistent reflection is something that is very necessary to point out, especially today, where I think as much as certain social media platforms like the Instagram or Twitter or WhatsApp allows for a certain kind of a demographic engagement, allows for a certain kind of a public engagement, it also does not allow us to realize that public engagement requires a consistency. It requires a consistency of thought, but it also requires a consistency of commitment. It is not something that one does as a hobby or only occasionally, but this consistency of writing and reflecting on what is happening around you. And that in your case, which is a peculiar case, that you have been an academic, you have been a researcher, and you have been a practitioner. And one could know your researcher life without knowing the other two lives, and one could know your practitioner life without knowing the other two lives. And I think that is something that has been absolutely admirable for me. So I may have a little bit of a fan moment from a friend moment or a colleague moment at this point, which is to say that to sort of build a series of engagements. So whether you're engaging with the materiality of architecture, with the sense of building architecture, with the sense of programming places that you're constructing, or one is engaging with the studio space, or one is engaging with the sense of what is the environment, what is the context that all of us are working in. And as much as one may borrow from the other, and it will do so, but in the other hand, there is a way in which each one is built upon its own identity and upon its own set of values. So I think this is something that I've also tried to sort of capture in the afterword, which is to say, what do we understand as the process of research in architecture? Is it something that is dependent on what is the project in the studio, what is the project on the drawing table or the computer screen today? Or is it a larger imagination of where we are located? Or is it a larger vision of where we are headed as a profession? So this sense of being with the time, but also sort of thinking through the profession, but thinking at a larger or a wider social scale or a wider cultural scale. And I think that is also something that we should highlight, that how you have constantly been the architect. And it is through the lens of architecture, it is through the observations of architecture that there is a reflection on the political and the cultural. And maybe I'll end at this moment. Thank you, Rahul.
Thank you, Kaivan. And you've saved me many words, because I was going to end on the notes that you ended with, which is, and this is not a, well, it's partly a book pitch, but it's not really a book pitch. But just to end by saying that I think you've nicely differentiated the intention of these two books. And, it's confusing for many people because these books came on the heels of each other, or one came on the heel of the other. And I call it my pandemic projects. And I think the luxury of the pandemic made the task very hard for Christina, but the luxury of the pandemic and the pause allowed one to pause and also reflect. And I think each of these volumes carry different sets of experiences, one in the act of building and the other in thinking through where the context was. So in some ways, they're very complementary and they kind of really inform each other. And that has been very satisfying for me as a process. And I want to kind of again thank Ranjit for beautifully articulated forward. I learned a lot from it because, sometimes one needs another view of connecting these dots, and Kaivan for the reflections in the epilogue or the afterword. And Rajesh, of course, as being someone who's embedded and part of this project in both physical and tangible terms. So thank you all, and Christina for producing it. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tahir. If there are any questions, we can take some questions. I think we have 5-7 minutes. If not, Kaivan, Ranjit, Rajesh, if anyone has additional reflections, we can spend a few minutes doing that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see each other.
Yeah. Thanks, Rahul. So I can see in the chat a question from Ashwita Yadav, where she says there's a composition of striking images and the vision that was showcased. Most of us here look at our immediate urban forms in this consciousness, maybe to a point where we end up dehumanizing these spaces and looking at culture in the form of a collective, time, or like informed a framework. How do we look at it through the lens of the people living through them and not just glancing? A suggestive approach for such a lens.
Well, I mean, you've actually, you asked your question and answered it too. So correct. So, I mean, I think if you just put, it's a humane approach, right? If you put the human being at the center and you look through their lens, you of course see another world. And therefore, at least for me, it was very important. Well, I mean, sorry to go back to another book, which is Architecture in India since 1990. There, the premise was that if you didn't use the lens of modernism, what would be the landscape you would see? And therefore, you saw another bizarre landscape, which had modern temples, which had glass buildings sprouting up everywhere. Then the question becomes, how do you make sense of it and how do you reflect about it? But the first moment is using the correct lens to be able to do that. And I think in the reading of the city, it was, as you can see from the essays, and you'll see in the book, the beginning, the essays were very much looking at the city through the lens of architecture, the static city, right? Urban design, how cities were set up by the British on different reclamations, what it meant. And then at some moment one realized, and I really attribute this to my discussions with Raghuveer Singh, the photographer, because I was privileged, blessed perhaps, that at the time he was doing his book on Bombay, we interacted a lot because Nandita had known him for many years and he would show up at our dining table unannounced and show us dummies of his book. He was having conversations with Naipaul at that time, and Naipaul was writing A Million Mutinies now, and the human moment had become very central to the way he was beginning to see the city. And it was for me, very early on, a learning moment. And really, when I remember discussing the cover with him and this discussion about whether it should be the skyline of the city, and he chose the Ganesh immersion. And for me, that was a eureka moment, because if someone looking at the city through the lens of a photographer, distilling those readings through his imagination, saw the spectacle that could represent the city through a festival, it made me really sit up and think, where does architecture sit on this spectrum in terms of identification and formulation and how being instrumental in the way a city is imagined? And so it was an interaction with a photographer there, and he had been influenced by Naipaul at that point, that many of these readings got altered. So I think it's a matter of the lens. And so I think for me, having become sensitive to that, one has always been looking at it from a more humanistic perspective. And that's how the interest in the ephemeral, the interest now in migration, the interest in how people move in space, rather than how, as professionals, we articulate space for people to move in, right? It's a reversal of the process, perhaps. And this is not new. There are traditions and histories of this. It's just that those histories get disrupted, and they gain relevance in different contexts at different times. So sorry for a complicated answer, but it really is the only way I can explain it. I think Rajneesh has a question. No? Oh, sorry. I can take some of these. There's a question from Diego, who says, hello, that writing is your sketchbook. How often do you write? Is it everyday ritual habit, or is it sometimes that you call you after a set of revealing moments? Diego, one writes a lot. For me, it is the sketchbook. Lots of them I have piles of random notes from meetings, from observation, which then in some mad way I synthesize. So yes, it is very much my sketchbook. I think I maybe write 500 words at least a day in some form. If I count my emails, then that's a madness. But if I don't count my emails, I in a disciplined way write at least 500 words a day. So it is truly a sketchbook. Aran Patel's question. What Kaivan mentioned in terms of ephemeral contributions on social media also mirrors how younger generations can often be drawn more to protests rather than enduring civic or political movements. How would you advise millennials and Generation Z to balance participation in urgent and pressing issues with developing the stamina to engage on enduring civic issues of urban design and planning? Kaivan, you want to take it? I mean, I don't know. I think, Aran, you have it posed to me. Kaivan, do you want to reflect on it, or should I?
You can go ahead, Rahul. Yeah.
Okay. No, so how would you advise? I mean, in the same way as I think one has attempted to demonstrate, you have different media. There's something about the written word in terms of communication, which also creates a form of commitment. You can change those commitments because you can reflect and you can move away or move towards something else. I mean, I think the problem with social media is we are yet in the process of developing a culture of how to engage with it. And so therefore it does begin to get ephemeral, fleeting, and often non-committal, because anyone can, say anything without committing themselves to something. I mean, someone jokingly once said, social media is like how the bar used to be in the old days, but at least at the end of the evening, everyone went home, went to sleep and got up sane, whereas with social media, it never ends. So I think cultures have to develop around the use of these media. And in that sense, writing, conventional and old style as it might mean in print, and the value of books, I think still persists. So it'll be things will evolve and balance, and Kaivan, I think, can add to it.
Just a brief, which actually connects the response you had to the human involvement question and this one. And I think it is, for example, to talk by example, which is easier to understand, the space of the UDRI or the Max Miller Bhavan or even the Kala Ghoda festival as it has developed, which have been consistent sort of public platforms where I think from being a young student to somebody sort of floating around trying to make sense of the city, those have been very important engaging platforms. And even somebody like Rahul, very frankly, my first memories of him is somebody who, even if he's introducing a speaker at the UDRI forum, there is much more that he lands up saying in the introduction, sort of contextualizing the lecture, whether it's on architecture or the urban transformation. So I think it is the and from that, it's very frankly, the Bombay conservation movement emerged out of that. It was not simply a certain fantasy of history, but it was actually engaging with the public sphere, engaging with public itself, that turned into the conservation movement or the Kala Ghoda Arts Festival. So I think to be sort of aware constantly of the professional space of conversations, the professional space of discussions, and participating in it, even if one is simply hearing things, is, I think, very, very very, very important. And I'm sure many of the essays, one can see reflections of what Rahul may have said simply as 2 sentences in an introduction, but there was a deeper thought to that.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Kaivan. So thank you. So there are 2 questions. We'll take the last 2 questions. One is from Rajneesh Vatas, who used to be the principal of the Chandigarh School of Architecture and is a critic. And he asks, how do you see the role of the planned city of Chandigarh as an exemplar with this pluralism of urbanism in India, where people assert over the planned city? I think, Rajneesh, that is, it's a process of happening, right? I think it's interesting, when I was a student, all one read was criticism about Chandigarh, really criticism about its urbanism. The buildings were always celebrated, and all the literature in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s was criticizing Chandigarh as urbanism. I remember, I think partly thanks to you, but I remember visiting Chandigarh about 4 years ago, and I was lucky to, in 2 years, go there 2 or 3 times. And I was actually completely knocked out by Chandigarh, because when I had gone earlier, you had these big avenues which had no shade. There were people cycling to work. Now Chandigarh had avenues with parks where people were sitting and picnicking, and they were driving in shade. And the city was really robust. It had the margins that could allow urban agriculture. You could collect water. You could manage ecologies. With time, cities, we judge cities too quickly. And to me, Chandigarh took these 50 years and has become the most beautiful, one of the most pleasurable cities to be in India. What does that mean? It means that I think its armature, however critical one might be in the way modernism dealt with urbanism, its armature was incredibly robust, maybe by default, maybe by the genius of Corbusier. But that armature and its neutrality, perhaps what Nehru intended, which is why he introduced modernism, allowed a kind of pluralism to flourish there, because it had no specific cultural affiliations in the way its architecture and its city form might have resonated. So perhaps that has resulted by default, perhaps, in a situation. Now, of course, the complexity of a shared capital allows another form of pluralism by default, but it's allowed the city to gain some kind of cosmopolitanism because it is an attractive place to be. And that's what cities have to finally do. They have to also function as physical plants, right? And as Charles Correa said, now that we are dedicating this event to him, he called Bombay a great city and a terrible place. Chandigarh was a great place, and now we always thought it was a terrible city, but now we are seeing it becoming a great city as it becomes more pluralistic. So perhaps there's that to anticipate. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's the only way I can answer your question. There's a question from Sibel, which is more kind of a little bit on a personal thing, asking how I keep in touch with India, though I'm spending time in the US. And my answer to that is, I live the life like the elves and the shoemaker, where we work round the clock. But we also have a studio in Mumbai where I am responsible for 21 people who are employed or engaged with it. And it's amazing how by doing things in India, one can keep a pulse of the place. But then also, and I will end on this note, also, with collaborators and friends like many of you who are on the screen, Ranjit and Kaivan and Rajesh, more specifically, who are rooted there. Our conversations are endless, and I am always grateful that I read the place, through our own exchanges. And my research is also focused on India, so it forces me to, it gives me the luxury of distance, but it also allows me the opportunity to engage with the nitty-gritty and the ground, so to speak. And so with that, I just want to kind of hand over to Nandita, because I think a very important event is going to follow. It's a great moment, and it's a real honor, I think, for all of us who participated in the book, Christina, Ranjit, Rajesh, and Kaivan, that we were given the occasion to release the book, because I think Charles Correa would have been very pleased He has inspired many of us to think about the value of writing and the value of writing precisely, which means making precise commitments, whether propositional or analytical. And so I, rededicate this moment to him and thank all my colleagues for participating and all of you for attending this event. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Rahul, and thank everyone. I mean, really, it's a wonderful book, and I hope we can all pour over it and go through it. In fact, there's a special offer on the book to commemorate the launch, and so it's being offered by Architecture on their website. So please use the code Kinetic when ordering, and I understand from Christina that it's only valid till Sunday night, this code, and you get a discount and free shipping to anywhere in the world. So if you'd like the book, order it now, I suppose. So anyway, but so to move on to the next part of the program, the awarding of the Charles Correa Gold Medal. The medal was initiated in 1998 by Charles and was instituted to recognize quality and talent among young students of architecture who address issues of the urban context where their projects are located. And over the last few years, the award was administered by the Urban Design Research Institute, a trust that Charles had set up in Mumbai in 1984. But going forward, however, the Charles Correa Foundation now will administer the gold medal annually. Initially, the award was open only to schools of architecture in Mumbai and Goa, because at that time, the drawings actually had to, physically be brought into one room to be reviewed. So this year, we had the opportunity, since we just taken it over, to rethink the whole thing. And so we've decided to invite colleges from all over India. And we invited about 50 colleges and had a really a jury of eminent architects, both in practice and in academics, to review the submissions and have identified students, to be who will be awarded the gold medal. It's a two-stage process. The first stage of the award is when the schools of architecture select what, in their opinion, is the best thesis project. The school identifies one student from its graduating class and nominates their work to the gold medal and sends it to us. It's a blind competition. We do not know at that point, and the jury doesn't know the names of the students or where the college is located or the name of the college or anything like that. And it's a jury of 5 architects or urban designers, landscape architects, and they meet to review all the work submitted. Though the format of the gold medal would, we would like not only to challenge students in the schools of architecture to focus on the pressing issues around us, but also to emphasize the role that architects can play in society as agents of change. And so, we were looking at thesis projects that hopefully address that. And that was kind of the brief that was given to the jury. One student will be awarded the gold medal, and additionally, 2 students will be awarded with an honorable mention. We reached out to 50 schools of architecture this year, and we received 38 entries. Part of the reason for this was the delayed timeline because of COVID, and the whole academic year was messed up. And so some of the schools couldn't have not finished or had not finished at the time of the jury review, had not finished the academic year. So, but we hope that next year we will have more schools, and at present, I think there are about over 450 schools of architecture around the country. So I don't know whether we'll ever reach a point of getting 450 entries, but anyway, it was fantastic. It was quite a challenge. It was, a really good quality of thesis projects. And in fact, in reviewing that, we thought, wouldn't it be fantastic to have a repository, a reference for students, both in the semester before thesis, when they're formulating the ideas of what they will address, and during the semester when they can use this database of thesis projects to see the kind of presentation drawings that were made, the kind of sketches, and so we're hoping to do that in the next few weeks. We've already started to work on that, and that will be a link through our website. So I would also like to say something about the medal itself. Charles designed it and had it minted. It's really quite beautiful, and more recently the UDRI minted a few more. And so when they handed over to us the administration of the gold medal, they also gave us the additional medals that they had minted. So we're really very grateful to them for their generosity, because I know they cost like quite a bit. So they're pretty solid. And so if you do receive this medal, look after it carefully. This year, I just say a few words about sort of introduce the jury. The jury consisted of, I think, in my opinion, really very good architects, urban designers, and landscape architects. And this is because the thesis projects really deal with a variety of scales. And so we wanted professionals who could really address and those issues. Dennis Pipers is a partner at Sasaki, and he was chair of the jury. Dennis has done amazing projects from all over the world in the last few decades. I think he's been working in Sasaki for 3 decades now. And he's done several campuses, master plans for several campuses around the world, including the winning entry for the master plan for the Beijing Olympics. And he's also taught at the GSD at Harvard, an urban design studio. Gurjeet Singh Marothra is principal architect of Marothra Associates in Ahmedabad, and he's one of India's most significant, contemporary architects. And he's been part of the earlier gold medal juries on occasion. Shimul Zaveri Kadri is a socially conscious architect and from Mumbai, and heads her practice SJK Architects. Nadine Gertz is a senior critic at the Rhode Island School of Design. She's a landscape architect, and she teaches courses in landscape and urbanism, and is very involved with the thesis book, which is a big part of the curriculum at RISD of putting your thesis together. So she had a lot to say about these thesis projects, and Bijoy Ramachandran, who teaches and works in Bangalore, and he's a co-founder of his studio 100 Hands. So these were the 5 jurors this year. They met and had a long set of meetings where they sort of reviewed the projects. They were really a very remarkable set of thesis projects. And so, the deliberations, I think, had to really nitpick. So if you were selected to represent your school, really see it as an honor. They were really very, very good projects. So in fact, to give you a sense of the process of the deliberations, we have a small video that we could play for you, just pulls out some of the kind of issues that were discussed, and it could give students a sense of what are the criteria that they were, these projects were being judged by. So if we just could run the video, yeah.
I'm wondering if we should just talk a bit in general about some criteria.
Okay.
Or why, how we will arrive at a winner. I mean, I can start in the sense that I think important issues are, is it a compelling topic, relevant and compelling topic that the student is addressing? How are they communicating their thinking and ideas is, I think, important. And then how they are addressing the topic in terms of strategy, the sort of intellectual underpinnings, and then the design skill of the approach, and then the quality of the material produced. How well is it conceived? Is it how is the representation? Is it creative and innovative and exciting? And does it all come together to show a really promising future designer?
Yeah. I would like to add that there is maybe in other words that there is some amount of innovation that is seen in design resolution, and also the subjects or the topics are not very common ones, because every year in year out you tend to see the same kind of projects which come. So people who have attempted slightly different subject matter and also a different approach. I would like to add that to the criteria.
In Jainism, you attempt to be non-violent, and building in itself is an act of violence. How do you, so this project was a maybe for me. And I think it was just the sheer kind of ambition of the project, where he looks at so many different prototypes of buildings and attempting to build as lightly as possible, sometimes in bamboo, sometimes in steel. That was the reason I selected it. If religion is a reason for people to gather, it's valid as economy is a reason for people to gather. I don't think we should sit in judgment on that. I understand how divisive a force religion is and has been, and so has economy, and so has, politics.
Yeah, I really appreciated her strong critique of how women use spaces and the questions of safety and comfort. I was now, after hearing you talk through it, Shimal, I think I was just, it was one of these things where the boards were a little overwhelming and there was a lot going on. But, I feel like, she is coming up with some simple and strong solutions. It's a big problem, and I think she talks through the issues in a very straightforward way, and I think it's important. I thought the simplicity was actually maybe one of its biggest strengths, and then just re-looking at the video, sometimes those design matrices a lot of fluff, but I felt like this one, thinking very clearly about what the issues are. And then I appreciated where he said he was learning from the workers, on the site in terms of thinking about how these spaces could be constructed.
It's also interesting to see that there were a number of projects that were talking about this kind of temporal architecture, something that is being installed for a small period of time and then dismantled and taken away. It seems to be a recurring theme with the students. In fact, so many of these projects, I haven't shared them yet, but with our current thesis students, I was going to, point them here because many of them are investigating similar things. It's a great resource. Yes.
Large public places, which are extremely large public spaces, and given the context of India, this is counted as probably one of the largest one in the country. There have been protests and there have been gatherings, and Republic Day parade happens in this ground. So really, really massive. The more massive you go with the public space, the more the ground has to be level. You can't walk otherwise. If you have too many steps, you can't have a protest. So it actually goes against the idea of a public space when it is not a level surface where a lot of public can gather. Because when there are so many people, you can actually not look at the ground. You cannot walk by looking down. You have to just walk with the crowd.
Okay, so from among the 38 entries, the jury sort of had a short list of 6. And well, I'll ask Shimul to say a few words about the shortlisted projects, which I think are really quite remarkable too. Shimul, yeah.
So it was heartening to see the very kind of idealistic scenarios that all the theses were attempting to solve. I mean, if one can't dream during thesis, when will one dream? And interestingly, those dreams stay with you for a long time after. So really wonderful to see a lot of kind of pertinent social issues being addressed through thesis. Obviously, finalizing on a few over the large number of entries is always difficult, but we did manage to shortlist 6 theses, and whereas others will speak about the winning entries, there were theses that made it to the final round, and it was very important for us as a jury to even consider the kind of dream that was being addressed, the issue that people were focusing on. And we were glad to see a thesis that was actually taking on the kind of mammoth issue of public housing or social housing or low income housing, whichever way one wants to look at it. It's such a multifaceted and difficult issue to solve, and yet it's wonderful to see that somebody had the ambition to look at it at a social housing scheme in Baroda and think about it, from the perspective not only of how housing like this can be built, but also in terms of creating prefabricated structures, creating modular structures that can have a certain amount of inside out. So yes, we definitely would like to commend that even an attempt was made to solve a problem like that through that project. Another project that we did shortlist was the construction workers housing. And I think we were really glad to see somebody addressing this issue, since we all work at construction sites and see some of the issues there, when you're building perhaps rather well-appointed buildings for sale or institutional use, and you recognize that the construction workers are living in very makeshift housing that perhaps is not adequately lit, ventilated. It's always a kind of stopgap solution. So again, the idea of looking at this in terms of creating a modular system, ensuring that there's enough open space for people to recreate. We really enjoyed the attempt made in that particular thesis. And then finally, we were heartened to see somebody looking at gendered space. And in that instance, the person was very interested in looking at his or her own neighborhood and how a space could be made much safer, one that was regularly used for commuting and, looking at the local issues in one's life and trying to see how those can be solved effectively through design is something that we really appreciate. Several people have done this in their projects, and really I think that is the way to finally make change in the world. So yes, all of these were theses that we enjoyed for the attempt made. Finally, of course, the thesis that has won the gold medal as well as the other two perhaps had a little more, took their thesis to a certain, to a certain detailed end, and were able to communicate their ideas very, very well. And, I'm sure all the other thesis jury will talk about each of the other interventions. But yeah, thank you for dreaming. Thank you for all the ideas that you brought to the table, for looking at extremely important thoughts and trying to develop not just design solutions, but often construction solutions, often social solutions to some of these problems. And we all recognize that it's a combination. Design finally is not just spatial design, but very much social kind of engineering, as well as construction and many other things for it to come together as a cohesive, implementable idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamul. The students that made the shortlist, the three projects that Shamul was talking about, Kairavi Gandhi from the Navrachna University in Baroda, Rishabh Verma from the Pillai College of Architecture in Panvel, and Shreya Patrabi from Rizvi College of Architecture in Mumbai. So now to the winning entries. There's a gold medalist and two honorable mentions. And the second honorable mention goes to Manish Shravne from the School of Environment and Architecture in Mumbai for the thesis Infrastructure for Artistic Practice. And congratulations, Manish. And that's really was a beautiful project, and I'd like to invite Gurjeet to say a few words about the project, and after that we'll play a video that Manish made as part, as part of his presentation. Apart from the drawings, all the students, or most of them, also produced a video. So we're going to share that with you. We're going to air that now, and just to give you a little insight into the project. So first, actually, Gurjeet will say a few words and then we'll run the video.
In the project, Infrastructure for Artistic Practice, what I find interesting is the fact that the student is not self-conscious. and his approach is as if the architect doesn't exist. It's a participatory role that the architect is playing in the redevelopment of this commune. What is also interesting is the fact that each of the interventions is completely unique from the other and uses local technology and placemaking as its basis. Besides this, I feel that the presentations are fantastic. The level of detailing is extremely high, and it gives a sense that the student has well understood the context and the culture of the place. With all these points, I feel that the student well deserves highly recommended placement in this competition.
Okay, now we're gonna.
My thesis is titled Infrastructure for Artistic Practices. In my research, I argue that the proposal for redevelopment project of informal settlement have always been viewed through the lens of providing basic amenities and service infrastructure. But the vibrancy of mixed-use informal neighborhood, their artistic production and sociocultural practices have rarely been thought of. Thus, the design dissertation asks what kind of inhabitation or infrastructure can sustain the dense artistic experience in an informal settlement. The site is an informal settlement located in an industrial neighborhood in Thane district. I have myself lived in this area since my childhood. For the intervention, I look at the existing public spaces within the settlement like the gullies, naka, node, street, bridges, footpath, etc. The idea was to create plugins or support infrastructure that respond to the existing practices. While developing the project, I asked myself what infrastructure emerged from the embedded social cultural practices within the neighborhood, where I found that the mandap is a unique structure which is temporary in nature, built by the community through mandala, local organization, and which afford the artistic practices and other cultural events for the specific period of time. The thesis extends the idea of bamboo mandap along with its vibrant event space and the participatory construction method that demonstrate a flexible adaptive system for various conditions in informal settlement. It proposed a number of innovative strategies for regenerating the existing socio-cultural practices through a catalog of urban tools. Some of these involve reactivating the pedestrian network, creating a working pods for daily wage workers, plugging for artistic practices, extension to the home, everyday activities, children's play area, pavilion to celebrate the festivals and community events, and building the workshop to experiment with the bamboo. The thesis aimed to strengthen the cultural infrastructure in informal settlement and to facilitate the participatory construction method. This is a systemic process that could be applicable to the other area of similar urban complexity. Thank you.
Well, congratulations again, Manish. It was an amazing project, and thanks Gurjeet also for saying a few words. The first honorable mention goes to Jaswant from Care School of Architecture in Trichy for the thesis project pop-up structures for temporal scenarios. So congratulations, Jaswant, and I request Bijoy to say a few words about the project.
Thanks to the Charles Correa Foundation, Nandita, and the CCF team for inviting me to be on the jury for the gold medal. It was wonderful to go through these thesis projects with Shimul, Nadine, Dennis, and Gurjeet. Thanks also to all the students for the great ideas, drawings, and provocations. A vast majority, around 60% of the projects, were institutional campuses and urban inserts. Though these were familiar types, what was surprising was that many sought to redefine, in terms of scale, what makes a campus and how one intervenes in the city. There seems to be a shift towards a more tactical engagement. Many projects were predicated on a detailed understanding of the context in which students were working, and this was heartening to see too. The pop-up structures thesis proposal from CARE was one of 3 such projects looking at the design of a structural framework to accommodate temporary habitation. The project received unanimous endorsement from the jury for its sophisticated representational quality, the attention to detail, its playfulness, and it tapped into a growing awareness of the need to look at architecture possibly as ephemera particularly relevant in the context of Rahul's new book. The project looks at a site en route to the temple at Palani, using it to accommodate pilgrims during the annual Thaipusam festival. The site is imagined before and after the festival season, returning it to its agrarian condition. A mix of accommodation, health services, and restrooms occupy the site during the festival, and these two are imagined before and after, dismantled and taken to other locations in the city. All of this rendered in wonderfully detailed drawings, showing both a sensitivity to the mechanics of these kinetic structures and the color and whimsy with which these would be draped. Having had access only to a vastly abridged version of the students' work, one hopes that the fundamental idea of a deployable armature was indeed studied thoroughly. The impact of having a large group of people stay for the duration of the festival around 2 weeks will be quite severe on the landscape, and this too is an area for detailed investigation. Managing waste, accommodating foundations or anchors for these structures, and so on. We hope this encouragement will push the student to further this study on deployable structures, and more importantly, continue to find ways to use design to actively engage with the world. The project reminded me of Mr. Correa's essay, Hornby Trains, Chinese Gardens and Architecture. He writes, and I quote, "I think I became an architect because of toy trains. As a child, I had a Hornby tin plate track and a couple of locomotives and wagons. Nothing very ambitious, really just enough to run the trains around your room, and the following day perhaps change the layout so that they could run into the next room under a table and back again. That was the marvelous thing about these old tin plate rails. They had flexibility. Every time one finished playing, back they went into their wooden box to be reincarnated the next day in a totally new formation," end quote. I urge the student to consider this amazing idea of a finite kit of parts capable of being assembled in new formations and thus able to accommodate multiple imaginations and exist in the city in fluid and transient ways. Congratulations.
Thaipusam is a festival. It is celebrated after the Pongal festival. People from all parts of Tamil Nadu walk to Palani from their respective places. Nearly a 12 lakh is being spent in organizing the festival. The main stretch of Vattanchitram to Palani is being documented. The documentation of the festival is based on the different approaches like how the event is organized, how the facilities are being made, how people use the facilities, the character of the festival, how the festival absorbs the people. There are 3 major functions which is provided by the municipality. They are a place to refresh, a place to sleep, and the medical facilities like primary health centers. As an inference, a disappearing environment is found within the 15 days of the festival. These structures are used only for the festival time along with the high cost, and after the festival these structures can move to the other places of other functions. There are 3 major functions are designed and clubbed with one another to act as institutions. A place to refresh. It consists of 4 units of toilets and water tank above. It is made up of aluminium plates and steel box sections to resist against anti-vandalism. It works with the help of horizontal scissor mechanism. When the pulley is rotated, the structure pops up to its original height of 2.7 meters. Under closed condition, height of 1.1 meter is attained. This is because of sliding wall plates. The outlet is connected with the existing septic tanks. Services like article fittings are flushed into the box section to get a clear profile of cut. A place to sleep. It consists of 24 units of sleeping cots at different levels with 450 mm above the ground. It works with a vertical scissor mechanism. The structure made up of rectangular box section connected one to the other. A fabric of trampoline is covered. Samiana is used as a roof and a wall for coverings. Primary health centers. A module of 2.5 x 6 is developed according to the study of primary health centers with a stove toilet in it. The skin of the structure is made up of GI sheet which is very light and folding capacity. The size of the structure is reduced to 1.2 meter when non-closing.
Well, congratulations, Jaswant, and thank you, Bijoy, for your description. It was very, very beautiful too. Well, so there can only be one winner who takes home the gold medal. And that goes to Prachi Kadam from the LS Raheja College of Architecture in Mumbai. Congratulations, Prachi, for winning the Charles Correa Gold Medal for the project Decoding Cultural Trauma, the case of Gerangao in Mumbai. And Dennis, if I could ask you to say something about the project and also about the medal and the process, because Dennis was chair of the jury, and yeah, it would be nice. Please, thanks, Dennis.
Thank you, Nandita. I was really honored to be part of this process that recognizes thesis students across India. And I really want to thank the jury. It was an amazing discussion, and also the organizers. It was so well arranged and planned, and made our job very easy to review the content and really get into the issues. I remember years ago, I saw Charles speak at MIT in Boston, and it was just after he won the RIBA gold medal. And his powerful ideas and design vision was clear. And I love the idea that the Charles Correa Foundation recognizes students and their thesis projects through this gold medal. The students who submitted have invested incredible energy exploring a breadth of ideas and challenges. What I want to recognize is that a thesis investigation is probably one of the first occasions where a student explores in depth a set of ideas that go beyond a project solution or a design solution. Through a thesis, you really have to take a stand. And for the Charles Correa Gold Medal this year, one body of work really stood out. And so I really want to congratulate Prati for decoding cultural trauma, the case of Gurangong in Mumbai. The challenge was to respond to a traumatic event that deeply affected this place and the society and the people there. How to address this and the development pressures there that were acting on this very dynamic urban site. It was a provocative proposition and certainly suggested an alternative vision to what might happen through the normal development process. This thesis, this project is about life in the city, and it is about an armature to support commerce, trade, home life, culture, civic life. And I'll read the sort of formal citation because it says some nice things quite well, I think. This thesis is laudable in that it uses architecture to address the sensitive issue of cultural and urban trauma by making it contextual and working within the existing urban fabric in Gurangong Bazaar in Mumbai. The project attempts to tackle the huge development pressure on the site through a human-centric design intervention. The sections are beautifully drawn, each one describing a different glimpse into the plethora of activities that take place within the built environment, unbuilt and unbuilt spaces. Architecturally, there is a conscious effort to bring consistency amidst a varied scheme of programs, spaces, and volumes. The plan is vibrant and strategic. The scattered roofscape helped to disguise the large volumes needed for a market. The drawings depict a maturity in building construction and in flexibility of use, they capture space and scale. And I really want to emphasize how thoughtful and skilled the approach to the architecture was in a consistent way with the larger thesis vision. So congratulations again on winning the Charles Correa Gold Medal of 2021.
Well, yes, congratulations, Prachi, and thank you very much, Dennis. And well, that's the end really, except, oh, 1 second. If Prachi, Jaswant, and Manish, if you are listening, we will activate your videos, and we would love it if you could say a few words, if you like. You know.
I think, yeah, let's play the.
Okay, yeah, we'll play her video. Sorry.
To a terrible event. It is when both the body and the mind are injured. Sometimes the event causing trauma goes beyond the body and affects everything around, including the place, thereby wounding the culture. One such event which led to a cultural wounding in India was the mill owners' strike of 1982. This event changed the place identity of the Miller Board of Kirangaon from its rich Kirni culture to a pure consumer culture. It caused immense gentrification and led to cultural trauma of Kirangaon and its people. Cultural trauma occurs when the locals feel their place is threatened by an event that leads to irreversible damage and changes the space that was once theirs, in turn redefining its identity. At present, amongst the densely gentrified lands of Kirangaon, Lalbagh precinct in Parel lies next in the line of redevelopment. In such cases, we as architects need to look beyond the trauma of urban violence and redesign spaces keeping the culture intact. Hence, through my thesis, I try to portray how the culture of Lalbagh lies in the daily hustle of its people, be it in the small-scale markets and stalls or in the dynamism of its temporality where spaces get transformed with time. Culture also lies in the smallest of details like that of age-old customs practiced in households or family traditions that are passed down through generations. When we design keeping these minute details in mind, it leads to harmonious societies. What is understood of the place is that the true culture of Lalbagh lies in its nitty-gritties, its chaos and constant interaction. Architecture that reflects the lifestyle of the people enriches the urban fabric and tackles urban violence. After all, the people and the space portray the culture of a place. Hence, my design proposal aims at designing for informality by giving simple solutions to the issues faced on site, with a sensitive approach, thus proving the power of architecture to heal cultural trauma. Thank you.
Well, congratulations, and I have your medal here with me, so I'm going to find a way to get it across to you. And yes, fantastic.
Thank you.
So, yeah, well done. Very well done.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity, and it means a lot, especially listening to the crits that I got, because the project has been a roller coaster. Like decoding that place has been a roller coaster, and it was. I'm very happy about the results, and thank you for the insights right now that I got. Means a lot.
Oh.
I would also like to add to the fact that architect Rahul Marothra's book helped me a lot while understanding this place, because the first time when you look at the fabric of the place, that is not what you see. But when you repeatedly go to that place, you talk to the people, especially when you talk to the people of different age groups, is when you really realize exactly, you realize what it is to be over there, how it was before, and what is exactly happening. So I think right now, I just graduated. So I think it's very important for us to connect to the people, because that is when we understand, that is when we really understand what we need to give to them. Because we can't just give to them without understanding what they want. So I think that was a takeaway from the entire project. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Jaswant, do you want to speak?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. Good evening, all. Thank you for giving this wonderful opportunity to me. I'd like to thank to Charles Correa Foundation and my college faculties and the principals, HOD, and the guide who guided me to do this. And also special thanks to Rahul Mehta sir. Like this was the book that's a departure point to start my thesis. It's a small scale mail. I consider this my thesis as a small scale mela to how to approach, how the people use, how all the people observe the structures. So that was my starting point. I didn't even expect that I will get a prize or honorable mention. So thanks to all jury members, thanks to my college faculties and friends who supported me to do this structures. Thank you.
Yeah. It was a wonderful video, I think, to actually see the whole, assembly and then collapse of those pieces. The whole kit of parts was really very well done.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Manish, if you want to say something.
Hello, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much to the CCF Foundation. I was very pleasure to be here and honor to be here. I'm from C College. So in this thesis, in this pandemic situation and this lockdown situation, it is very difficult to document the site. So this pandemic situation, it's chance or giving me the opportunity to deal with the neighborhood, my own neighborhood. So there is very exciting where when I am documenting the sites, and I'm very connected to the local peoples and their social culture practices and their culture. So I like to intervene their existing structure. So that things are very excited to me. And when I see when I creating the infrastructure for them, so culture infrastructure. So when I was question myself which kind of infrastructure that I embodied in socioculture, existing socioculture practices in a neighborhood. Where I found that mandap is the unique structure which is temporary in nature, and it is come every year, and there is no lots of money. There is a small sum money investment in this structure. So that are fascinated me to work with as a concept to my design. And this is I think I have more time than I just develop the whole my neighborhood settlement. So this the time is limited to me. So as an architect, we are the imagination, and we have to take a paper and pencil and sit one thing and throw our ideas. So this kind of time given the opportunity to work with the neighbor. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. You should have entered you in your neighborhood competition last year. This was all about sort of community, but congratulations to all of you. And I didn't have a vote because I was not on the jury, but I was very, very happy with the outcome and the jury selection. So congratulations, everyone, and thank you to everyone who participated, and to all the schools, to the faculties that have actually worked with the students and mentored them, and to the audience. And we're gonna, this is the end of our ceremony, and look forward to seeing you at one of our other events. If the students could stay on, and also the jury members and everyone who was involved in the book launch, and people from the foundation who have worked very, very hard to put all this together, including amazing technical skills, which I had no idea we had. But anyway, we could all come on screen and take a group picture. So that would be really nice. Can we do that? I don't know how. We would need to pin everyone, I suppose. Yeah. Actually, we should have got a photograph of all the 38 students as well. So next time we're going to have to put that together. Okay. So,
there's many pages of this, but clicking screenshots. Thanks so much, everyone, for being a part of this. Smile. And smile again. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, and congratulations, and see you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Congratulations. Well done.